That's our new band. Fantastic. Yeah. Thanks for your energy and your singing and gusto
And the drum machine.
and the drum machine.
There's a little button on your microphone.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Please pause a second. So it goes green.
There we go.
There you go. You're on
I'm going to turn this one off. Okay. I may need some other direction as we go. Oh, thank you. See, it's a community effort. I'm Bedford Hines, I think. I have to look at the screen. And my topic today, and it's really led in very beautifully, synchronicity, one of your key words, Beverly. It shows up this morning in the music, and I am a spirit today. That's what I want to get into, but I'm starting with the idea that I'm human self and then divine self. Now that's the opposite of what unity typically talks about. We are divine beings having a human experience is the unity affirmation. And I believe that. However, I know, and I think probably it's true of you people too, that our human experience typically precedes the awareness of carrying our divine self. And just yesterday I had one of those experiences, not that every moment isn't one of those experiences in some ways, but yesterday I was raking the front yard, and it was windy, as you know, and the darn wind, the darn leaves, I should say, wouldn't keep the leaves. The wind wouldn't keep the leaves in place, and it was exasperating. And after a few couple words, choice words, I got it onto a tarp and dragged it out into the street. But it was certainly an example where my human self was dominant at that moment. And I was living with my expectation of the way it should be, and it wasn't, nature wasn't cooperating. However, divine order did occur, I think, because then I was mindful that I can look at this differently, that there was some way to release the human mindset of exasperation and irritation, and see that all is well, really. And I was able to get the leaves basically in order and dragged over to the other side of the street. And so the divine self did come out, but not prior to my human self, if you will. And then when you think of it, you know, we get up in the morning and we take care of our body and clothe it and feed it and brush our teeth and do all kinds of things. And then we get into the day that probably by our human mind has already set an agenda of this is what I need to do today. And so we're into that, and oftentimes we might get in the car and find traffic as bad as I did the other night going to Bergstrom Ford, and found out that there was a big accident ahead. But fortunately, divine order, I got off the highway. But the point being, it wasn't the way I expected it to be. And that's exasperating and frustrating. And that's part of our human experience, isn't it? For all of us. So this morning, I'm intrigued as to how to make the divine self that we really are more prominent, more in the foreground of our minds rather than the background. So it isn't just on Sundays or occasionally during the week that we remind ourselves of that, but it's much more persistent, consistent, available in our minds. And so we are going, in a sense, from human self to divine self, but now it's an attempt to make that divine self much more the realization, even during our human times of limits and frustrations. So that's the entryway into today's talk. Now I'm going to go right into, however, the divine self, if you will, as a intro to emphasize that part of ourselves. And I'm using, I'm quoting from the Course in Love. It's similar to the Course in Miracles. It's similar to the Way of Mastery. Each one's a little bit unique and different, but it's all of which Jesus is talking to us and is correcting some of the misinterpretation and misunderstandings in the New Testament, all of which are based on love. All three tomes are really focused on that theme, that everything is love, ultimately. So I'm quoting from the Course in Love this morning, and I'm quoting Jesus, because Jesus is the author. Jesus says, I come to you today not as a personal self who is other than you, but as a divine self who is the same as you. What this means in practical terms is that you let the personal self step back and the true self step forward. Realize that all of your concerns are still for the personal self, a self whom you continue to believe can fail to fulfill or live your mission and your purpose. That's how we get into our human self. So Jesus goes on to say, but something that I think we can all say, and so I invite you to read with me out loud, if you would, together. I am no longer the personal self who was separate and alone. I am my Christ self. I dwell in unity. My identity is certain. This is the truth. And we continue. I am not less than I once was, but more. Where once I was empty, I now am full. Where once I dwelt in darkness, I now dwelt in light. Where once I had forgotten, now I remember who I am. Now I go forth to live as who I am within the world. Doesn't it feel good just to say that? Now, the question is, how can we be aware of it more and more moment by moment? Welcome, just have a seat. So, a picture, it may not be as clear as might be, but it's a person who looks very pensive and pondering. And I consider it as, okay, what is life all about? Who am I really? Here I am as a human being with all kinds of doubts and fears and apprehensions, and yet there's got to be something more, right? Well, the common human doubts arise from seeming deficiencies. You know, the real predicament of being human is we live in a combination of lack and separation. Those are the two elements that unfortunately define being human and define all of the difficulties and challenges that we have as human beings. And we look for something more. It's like there constantly, isn't there something more than just doubts and fears based on separation and lack? And we hunger for something more. Well, the human being needs to feel there are three primal needs that are universal in being human. The need for feeling secure and safe is number one. We come out of the womb and the environment is bombarding us with all kinds of sensations and sounds and sights and lights and touches. And so that we have a lifelong need to find ways to feel more and more secure. And then, as the brain is maturing rapidly, we recognize that we are separate and we need to be loved. The antidote for separation is loved, is being worthy as you are. And then comes the ability to move our muscle system. And that's the first sign of empowerment and in control of oneself, not of the external. As as we recognize that we are God-given full complements of all three of those, then we can settle down. And the divine self that we really are can come online much more readily. But as long as we're so wrapped up in those three areas, we're always on a search. Well, the dictum of the ego, as noted in the Course in Miracles, is seek, but do not find. So we're always seeking for one or more of these three things, but never fully, because they cannot be met out here. Temporarily maybe, but that's about it. And so it leaves a hunger, that hunger for something more. There's got to be something more. If there was one way to summarize what I hear mostly and experience within myself that is tied to this human self search of seeking, is the belief, the fear that I'm not good enough, that we're seeking to say, I am good enough, to feel that, to really know that, to live that. Then again, once again, we're free to know the divine self that we really are. Well, the design of reality with a capital R is that that's a given. We're fully good enough always. That we've been fully invested with all three of these major primal needs. But the human self doesn't believe that. And that's our quandary. And so we've suffered the delusion of lack and separation. Going backwards. So our human small s self has all our feelings and thoughts and beliefs and sensations that are interpreted through the prism of the lack of separation. And so if that's the prism, we're understanding all these different feelings, thoughts, beliefs, and sensations on the human self, we're left wanting and seeking. And as long as we continue to seek on the human level, we just hit one wall after another, inevitably. And I think that's the value of unity, if you will, is that we know there is a reality that we are it, as opposed to a lot of other denominations that seek for it still in another realm. But we're it. We're it right here and now. As the Course in Miracles says, heaven is right here, right now. And so, nonetheless, this is our human experience. But the metaphysical truth is, I am responsible for everything that happens to me. And some like to say that we are creators of everything. There's nothing that happens that we haven't created. Now, whether you accept that or don't, sometimes it's pretty hard to do so. Well, like for instance, an accident that I don't think I brought upon, or an airplane accident, or a baby born with some immune deficiency, whatever. And we can say, how could this be that the person brought it upon? And it might be. I'm open to that possibility. But nonetheless, what I think is irrefutable is that I am responsible for everything I see. You know, for the wind yesterday that I didn't think that I created, but I'm responsible for how I look at the blowing leaves. That's my responsibility. And that's my freedom. Isn't that a wonderful thing? To think that we're free to look at everything through the eyes of the largest self. And it makes all the difference in the world. And then separation and lack begin to be diminished. Therefore, I can change my mind, and consequently, reality does really change. And that's awesome. Hooray. And then as I accept this is one of the key ways, we're going to get into another one, where my divine identity begins to come out into the foreground of my awareness. And the fact that I have suffered frustration or exasperation, unmet needs, whatever it might be, fades in importance. It's still present. We can't deny our human existence, our human experience, but no longer is it dominant as a defining definition, if you will, of what reality is all about. It reminds me of a story that I'd like to share with you now. You may have heard of this story, or some were ones. It's the story of a very wise sage, of course, in the Himalayas. Isn't that always where wise sages live? And this wise sage had a widespread reputation as somebody you could go to and you would find answers to any question that you had. You would find direction that was just right for you. Anything that you really needed to know was available through this wise sage. And people flocked to see him. Well, along came this wily young man who questioned, who doubted that this really could be true. And so he devised something that he wanted to present to the sage. And he asked for an audience. And the sage granted him the audience. And so he marched in, and he confronted the sage, and he had his hands behind his back like this. And he said, "Sir, I have a bird, and I would like you to tell me, is that bird alive or is it dead?" Knowing that if he said alive, he would wring the bird's neck and show a dead bird. If he said dead, he would show a live bird. So he caught him. And so he asked that question: is this bird that I'm holding in the back of my back alive or dead? The wise sage closed his eyes for several moments, and then a smile came across his face. He opened his eyes, and he said, "It's up to you to decide." Now, isn't that really true? It's up to each one of us to decide about anything and everything. That's one of the ways to get in touch with our divine self, is that we know that we're empowered to be in charge, to be in control, not of things out here, but of how we look at everything, what we believe. So how do we do this? I put up identification. Am I my thoughts, feelings, sensations, and beliefs, or am I that which is aware of those? Awareness is the easiest thing to get into and impossible to miss. Awareness is always there. I'd like to read something that leads into this, as we're going to do in a moment. It's called the wetness practice. The wetness practice is a little bit like surfing. We ride waves of consciousness. Through committed practice, our capacity to master larger and larger waves improves. Yet as we surf from wave to wave, a tension of grasping and desiring and effort lingers in the background. And inner seeking drives our practice. Wherever we are, we tend to gaze longingly over the horizon for the next big wave. But what do all waves have in common? In what context do they all arise? From the gigantic to the minuscule, all waves share an ever-present wetness. No degree of ability, no amount of effort, no practice can usher waves with greater wetness. A wave never enters into wetness, nor does it ever exit wetness. So, all waves are always already perfectly wet. An open invitation perpetually welcomes everyone to stop and feel the wetness. Soak as pure presence. Rest as the simple feeling of being. relax as the spaciousness of open awareness. No boundaries survive the emptiness of the absolute. Spirit completely saturates the cosmos, and your present awareness contains the entire truth. This practice is a way to express this, that which we already are, and not as a means to attain something we lack. No transformative practice can bring you closer to spirit, because you are already dripping wet as spirit right now. Ever-present awareness is the absolute context for all the relative development fostered by this practice. Relative development is all the human experiences. All change occurs within the changeless. All transformation arises in stillness. All practices take place within perfection. Practicing within such a context means just this: abide as wetness, embrace all waves. This practice offers the most comprehensive strategy for becoming, which is what the human being is all about, amidst the radiant embrace of timeless being. I think that's powerfully said. We are wet, we are saturated, moment to moment. And it's our responsibility, our prerogative, our pleasure, if you will, to realize this. And as we do, life becomes ever more enjoyable, transformative, open, transparent, relaxed, and joyful, simply because this is our reality. And so, that is our Christ self. So I invite you for a moment to consider just this. And we're going to do more than this, but starting with this. What is? Just take a moment and focus on just what is. Notice whether there are any boundaries to this spacious awareness of what is. Are there any boundaries? Or is it limitlessly expansive? Or consider, is there any specific place of what is? Or does what is end with the ends of your body, or is it limitless? And even more practically, consider whatever might be going through your mind as a human being right this moment, whether it's in reaction to my words or whether you're dreaming of something else or thinking about the day ahead, or what you're feeling, or have a sore seat now that you've been sitting for a while. Whatever might be occurring to you on the human level. Consider, is that who you are? Are you those sensations? Are you those thoughts? Are you those feelings? Is that who you really are? I think it becomes quickly apparent that that's not who you and I are. We can experience something way beyond our thoughts and feelings and sensations and beliefs. whatever they may be. How can that be who you and I are? We are that which is aware of all those things, but way beyond those things. We have the human experience, but we are this awareness. We are this divine self. We are this Christ self. That encompasses, paradoxically, encompasses the human self, because there is only this awareness. That's all there is. And so all the particularities of human experience come from this awareness. So everything that we do experience on the human self is simply part of the absolute, the real self, the Christ self, in a particular expression. So all that we might get upset about, worked up over, reactive to in the human self is all coming out of the awareness itself. As we identify with the awareness self, we find a freedom, we find a joy, we find a release from the way that we think on the human self. We get caught and constricted and in the web of separation and lack. But as soon as we realize that's not me, no, those are feelings, those are thoughts. They all come out of the awareness, pure awareness itself. And there's only one, and that's all of us. No separation, no lack. Everything that we could ever think we need is fully present. And that leads to that joy and that freedom that is available every moment. As we explore that more and more, by asking such simple questions as, does it end? Is there any end to this awareness? Is there any specificity to it? Is there any way of defining it with my body? And of course, no. And when I'm having a thought or feeling, especially anything that might be disturbing, is that who I really am? No. And immediately we begin to slip back into the divine awareness. And that becomes ever more fun, ever more joyous, just to explore what's it like to be divine awareness. There's a lot to explore in that realm. It's not just a kind of empty thought that seems like it's a nice thought, but I can't pin it down. Enter into it by practice. Realize you are the wetness. You cannot be other than the wetness. And as the wetness, you can experience all the waves, which is what our human experience creates, as the wetness. That's liberation. That's real freedom. And so it is. Thank you.